It was early. The morning sunrise had only just started casting light across the city of Jerusalem. Long shadows followed Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of James, and their friend Salome across the cobbles and gravel. The crisp morning air was filled with the sounds of birds already busy with their work and play. The city was yet to fully stir. As they walked, they passed the occasional sleepy merchant, making their way into the city. They passed through streets, past Roman guards on their final leg of their night watch, past the homes, official buildings, baths, and courtyards, until they reached the boundaries of the city gates. They continued their paces beyond the city walls to the outskirts of city life until they reached the catacombs of the city's dead. The women carried the spices they had purchased from the marketplace along the way. They proceeded in search of the tomb in which Jesus had been laid to rest only days before. As they drew near, tears began to form and well in the eyes of Mary Magdalene. The pain and loss and grief was still consuming and raw. The events of the last few days had drained nearly everything in her. This was far beyond mourning. This was agony, wrenching, seizing agony. She was exhausted, spun and wrung out like a wet cloth through spirals of emotions. Her heart would race with fear as she thought about what might happen to her, happen to them, at least the them that stuck around. And the racing would progress to pounding, indiscriminate rage.
How could they do this to him? To him? Don't they realize who he was, what he meant to us, to these people? To me.
And at this, her rage would melt into pure grief as she thought about how this man had changed her entire life, given her something to live for, something to believe in, and now he was gone. Her grief would eventually swing back towards fear, as she would wipe away the tears from her eyes, compose her expression, and at least pretend to go through the motions of normalcy, hiding any indication that might expose her as one of his disciples, one of his rabble-rousing inner circle. Since the first blow to his body at the hands of the Roman guard in Gethsemane, it felt as if her ears had been ringing with tension. She had watched her whole world unravel in slow motion. The screaming, accusing voices were muted around her like her head was underwater. The periphery of her eyesight narrowed progressively until all she could see was him, bleeding, wincing, broken, tortured. It felt as if they were killing her. This morning brought a degree of relief. She could hear the birds singing. She could feel the warmth of the morning sun on her face. She had slept, not the entire night, but some, for the first time in days, but still there was a deep sadness that seemed to be living in a pit in her heart. But she had to continue on. Perhaps today felt lighter because she could finally do something to help him. Even if the spices she carried in her hands meant she was about to anoint his body in death, it still felt like she was able to love him and care for him. Perhaps it would help with the mourning and the grief. As they drew closer to the location of the tomb where Jesus had been laid, Salome stopped. The other two women paused and looked back, searching for the reason for Salome's hesitation.
How are we supposed to roll away the stone?
She was referring to the large, heavy stone that served to block the entrance to Jesus' tomb. The women hadn't thought about this reality until now. How would they manage to maneuver a giant stone away from the entrance of the tomb? A stone large enough to serve its purpose, to seal away physical remains to eternal rest, and to deter the prying attention of would-be thieves or officials. The women stood still for a moment, perplexed, embracing for the potential of another emotional downturn. Mary, the mother of James, threw her hands up to the top of her head in exasperation as she started to sway and then pace. The other two women remained still, searching their minds for a solution while keeping an eye on their friend's distress level. The circumference of Mary's pacing grew larger until, without the others noticing, she had walked her exasperated steps clear over the hill before them. Salome and Mary Magdalene were looking at one another, not noticing the departure of their friend until they heard a loud shout come from further down the path on the other side of the hill.
Mary! Mary, come quickly!
Mary Magdalene and Salome shot each other quick glances before taking off over the hill towards the shouts. As they ran over the crest of the hill, they saw Mary, mother of James, standing just on the other side. She stood there, still, eyes unmoving. As they approached from behind her, the approaching two women measured the angle of their friend's fixed sight line and looked out. There, their eyes landed on a tomb, carved out of a large rock face. The entrance to the tomb was dark with shadow and open. The large stone that previously blocked the entirety of the entrance to the tomb had been rolled away. It leaned against the rock face to the side of the open entrance.
What?
One of the women exclaimed.
Why is the tomb open? How?
Exclaimed another as the three of them began to approach the tomb cautiously. They looked around and listened for anyone or anything that would explain what they were seeing. What if whoever rolled the stone away was still here? What if they were dangerous? Aside from the morning birds, a slight breeze, and the sounds of their own footsteps and heavy breathing, they saw nothing as they arrived at the tomb. The three women stood there in front of the open entrance to Jesus' tomb, working up the courage to peek inside. Mary Magdalene shifted. Her face became fixed with determination. Her fear had circled back to rage again, as she was now set to face whoever it was that would desecrate the resting place of her Lord, if, in fact, they were still here. She walked into the darkness, stooping down slightly to peer into the inner chamber of the tomb. Her keen eyes adjusted to the darkness within. She focused on the stone block that his body had been laid out on, and there, instead of a wrapped and lifeless body, her eyes focused and fixed on what appeared to be a young man sitting on the right side of the chamber, dressed in a white robe. Mary gasped and slipped as she attempted to flee from the entrance. Her mind raced through fractions of seconds.
What? Who is that?
Then there was a voice, loud enough that all three women heard it clearly. Mary, do not be alarmed. You seek Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. Mary regained her composure and peered back into the dark chamber. The other two women joined her there in the entrance and peered in. As they looked in, the robes worn by the young man inside became more and more dazzling white, causing the entire darkness to flee from the chamber. Do not be alarmed, the emanating figure said again. He has risen. He is not here. Mary Magdalene could feel her heartbeat thumping in her throat. Her jaw fell slack, and her mouth dry as the pace of her breathing quickened. Tears began to fill her eyes, but these were new tears. Instead of the burning hot tears she had poured out over the previous days, these tears felt full and refreshing on her eyes as she continued to look upon what she now assumed was an angel of the Lord. Her legs felt weak beneath her. Slowly, She lowered herself to her knees, leaned back on her heels, and covered her mouth with her hands as she ran those words through her mind, attempting to hear them again and again. He is risen. He's not here. He is not here. He is not here. The angel's voice filled the chamber again. See the place where they laid him. Go tell his disciples and Peter that he is going before you to Galilee. There you will see him just as he told you. Then the angel was gone. The chamber filled once again with shadow and silence. The women could hear the sounds of birds once again in the daylight outside. The tomb was empty. My name is Tony, and this is Urban Mystics. Thank you for listening.